feel like when we're young in the Lord, and maybe in most relationships, like you've always got to have a really clear bridge. Like we're moving from this to this, and you get to see the whole bridge, and you know the transition. I think as we grow in trust and relationship with God, the bridge gets less clear, or there actually isn't a bridge.
That's right.
And so that's been certainly my experience in my life is as I get older in the Lord, the risks get bigger, and the waiting is longer.
You're listening to the Ferment Podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Noel Shearer. Noel is a church planter, pastor, and songwriter from Denver, Colorado. This episode is brought to you by Monk Drums. Monk Drums is a creative desert venture that strives to combine beauty and business as one heartbeat. Monk Drums' main focus is handcrafted wooden drums that allow us to love, assist, and serve all who accompany us on this path. Use the coupon code FERMENTPOD to get 5% off your Monk Drums order. Find them on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Monk Drums, and every Monday look for hashtag Monk Drum Monday. Speaking from personal experience, monk drums are wonderfully crafted and they sound amazing. They blend the best traits of both the djembe and the cajon, and I found them to be incredibly versatile in both the live and studio environment. Check them out at monkdrums.com.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, with new songs being added all the time. Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. You can also find them on social media, Facebook at worshipteam.com, Twitter at worshipteam, Instagram at worshipteam_WT. Visit them at worshipteam.com for a free trial today. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com.
Hey, everybody, you are listening to the Ferment Podcast. My name is Adam Russell, and I'm super stoked today because I have a very special guest. Noelle Shearer is here. Say hello, Noelle.
Hey, everybody.
That's right. Noelle is a worship leader. Noelle is a songwriter. Noelle is a church planter. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
It is.
And you're a mom and a wife. Any other adjectives and job descriptions and personal identifiers you just want to throw in there?
I hope I'm a friend.
A friend.
Yeah,
there we go. Hey, I guess I want to start here, Noelle. A lot of people, I think, in the Vineyard on the East Coast kind of know you because you were in that Columbus swirl and you've done some stuff like leading worship at national conferences and stuff, and we've seen your face and whatnot. But I would love it if we could begin by talking about your history. You know, that's kind of where we start on this podcast anyway. Could you just tell us who you are and where you're from and like how'd you grow up?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think so much of who I am is shaped by who my parents are. So my parents got saved, both of them pretty radically in the Jesus movement of the 70s.
Same here. So did my mom and dad. Same.
I feel like everything was radical at that point. Like no one has a normal conversion story or whatever. But yeah, they came to faith, were absolutely wrecked for Jesus. And my dad's an artist by trade.
What kind of artist?
It's called scrimshaw. It's an engraving.
Oh, dude, I know what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, side note.
Yes.
My father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
He's a chiropractor, but at one point in history, he still is. He's like a gun aficionado, and he was like into like mountain man stuff, and so he has these bison horns,
mm-hmm.
and he made one for my wife, and oftentimes, like, I guess in I don't know, the frontier,
mm-hmm.
they would make little maps on.
Oh, wow.
On like a bison horn, you know, like scrimshaw.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the technique. And so he scrimshawed a bison horn for my wife.
Wow.
And it's a map from our house to his house.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah.
So your dad is a scrimshaw
He
artist.
is. He's one of the few scrimshanders in the country.
Scrimshanders?
Yeah, it's a real thing. It's actually one of the few American art forms.
Wow.
So it was formed in the whaling era because whales' teeth are ivory and sailors would etch I'm sure maps and mermaids and
Amazing.
sea battles and all sorts of stuff. So anyway, it's one of the few art forms that we can say are American.
Not only is the Ferment podcast inspirational, it is also educational.
Educational thing.
That's
You're welcome.
right.
You're welcome. Anyway, so my dad's been doing art full time for 45 years, something like that. But they got wrecked by Jesus in the 70s, heard of this Christian community in Tennessee that was not quite a commune because people had jobs off of the land.
But it was close.
It was, yes.
There was no, but there was no David Koresh.
No, no.
Good.
Remain kind and positive.
Yeah.
No. So my parents moved there when I was basically an infant
Yeah.
to go to their Bible college, Bible school. And so that's where I spent my childhood, was in Eastern Tennessee at Shekinah. It's named Shekinah.
Oh, that sounds extremely
The
spiritual.
glory. Yes, 300 acres of God's glory in
Is it
Eastern
still
Tennessee.
there?
It is still there. It still has the same pastor as when I was there.
Whoosh.
Legit. So that atmosphere for me, I was there through 5th grade, with a little break in the middle when we moved back to Ohio, whatever. With art, you can move all sorts of places.
That's right.
But anyway, that community really focused on worship and intercession, and specifically around the nations. So my childhood was very sheltered. There were 6 people in my class.
Yeah.
I rode horses. I could play wherever I wanted to. There's lots of freedom in those sort of ways, lots of naivete, I'm sure, but also a really potent invitation into the kingdom of God. So kids were absolutely included in everything that we did. Sometimes I still get adults that are my parents' generation sending me pictures of like me laying hands on speakers that would come in, and
Amen.
not because I was special, but like that's just the culture that was created.
That's right.
So I started songwriting at a really early age. Those songs were invited into church culture. Again, we had like Saturday night prayer meeting, Wednesday night service, 2 services on Sundays. It was, the whole life was, wrapped up into the church there, which obviously had really beautiful things and some really
Difficult,
messy things as well.
How do you, when you look back on it, how do you feel emotionally?
I feel mostly grateful.
Yeah.
I feel like throughout my life, it's been pretty easy to see clearly what was gift and what was curse. I feel like for my parents' generation, it was all tangled together.
Yeah.
So that feels like a gift to me, that the gifts are real clear, and the residue that was not good seems real clear as well. Doesn't mean it's easy to get rid of.
Yeah.
So legalism and, weird control
it's
stuff.
weird how like legalism or just sort of like oppressive environments, they have their own kind of muscle memory.
Absolutely.
It remains, you
Yes.
know? Yeah.
Just having
But I'm really glad to hear that like you can separate it. You see it.
Well, I see it. I still have to wrestle through how that infiltrates my life. And like you said, muscle memory, how that actually shows up still. But for me, there's a lot of gratitude around the invitation into hearing God's voice, participating. There was a real emphasis on the nations. So we had men and women from all over the world, but specifically India, that came to the Bible college, that lived with us, that so from very early on, this idea of like God's kingdom is really big, it's really diverse. We had
isn't necessarily white.
Correct. All of those things that we had flags every, like, there was a deep celebration of God's kingdom being global.
Yeah.
So those are things that I think have carried through my whole life, and were deeply formed in that place. Some other stuff was, not quite as good.
Yeah.
But that I'm grateful for.
Amen.
Yeah. So anyway, Tennessee, then we moved to Illinois. My dad got a job as a youth pastor, and that was sort of the only kosher way to leave that community, was to be sent out into an actual position somewhere else. So my family needed to leave for my parents' health for sure. So we moved to Illinois. It was heartbreaking for me. I remember writing.
Because you had friends?
Because I had friends, and I was just home. Tennessee was home. It was beautiful. I had a horse. I'd finally gotten my own horse. Peaches.
Oh,
Peaches the
Did you have to
horse.
leave him behind?
I did.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So I remember crying in the U-Haul just crossing into Illinois because it was so ugly.
Yeah.
And there are beautiful parts, I'm sure.
Of course.
But
Eastern Tennessee, though, is very special.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to move to like cornfields and flat and all of that, brown, it was very sad for me, and middle school and all of that.
Yeah, just the trauma of being in 7th or 8th grade is thing.
So we moved there at the start of my 6th grade year. Within 2 months, the church split,
Great.
which we did not know.
That's wonderful.
It was not wonderful. We did not know we were moving into something that was about, to break. And in a good way, it was that the pastor had too much of the Holy Spirit, and the denomination asked him to stop moving in the means of the Spirit, or leave the denomination. So,
what was the denomination?
It was Free Methodist.
Got it.
Yeah. Another educational moment.
Yes, please.
I didn't grow up with denominations, so all this was new. But Free Methodists were, you would think or maybe assume from the sound that it was like more of the Holy Spirit or more charismatic or something. But it was actually people had to buy their pews. They had to buy their seats. And so church then often became elitist, the Methodist church. So Free Methodists were this movement where nobody had to buy their seat. It was free.
Nice. There we go.
So
that was the community that you left.
We were in a non-denominational in Tennessee. We moved to this Free Methodist church, which then split. So we did the whole mobile, move to the local school and do the gymnasium deal. And so my dad immediately then lost his job because, where the situation had changed significantly. So that sent our family, I think, into a pretty big tailspin. My dad had struggled with depression for a long time, and that whole series of events really changed things. So he went through a couple years of really severe depression, was hospitalized for most of my 7th grade year. We were in a new city. My mom had to find a job.
That's very severe.
Yeah. So for me, my middle school years are like a black hole. It's just not that I don't remember it. I unfortunately remember lots of things.
And you feel it.
Yeah. And my dad loved us like so well through that, but just needed to get help in a different way, and tried to protect us as much as he could from the impact of what he was going through. But it was a very lonely time. And for me, a time where just seeking something to provide, affirmation.
And you said your mom went and got a job.
Yeah.
Was that the first time she had worked outside the home?
Yeah. Other than helping my dad with art. So she got a job as a phlebotomist.
Oh my gosh, blood. Okay.
Drawn blood.
You're just, okay. So I have a few issues. That's one of them.
Well,
I have lots of medical issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like 90% of my issues are all medical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, she would have added to those.
Yeah.
But,
I think I clearly need inner healing. I'm sure it's inner healing. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. But what a brave thing for your mom to do, right?
Absolutely. She's super brave. So she took on what she needed to take on. Again, we're a new community, learning Illinois, learning the Midwest, learning a new church, all of those things. So lots of respect to both my parents to weather that and help us as kids get through it. But I think in those years, I took on an unhealthy responsibility that I didn't.
Were you the oldest?
Yeah, I'm the oldest. Yeah. So anyway, lots of things got formed there that I think the Lord has taken many years to unform.
Yeah, even before we started this podcast, you and I were talking off the microphone, and you said that you're an Enneagram 2.
I am.
One of the little themes I've seen in Enneagram 2s is they oftentimes take responsibility that isn't theirs.
It is.
Yeah.
Sick.
I've heard that so many times. Yeah. That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm a 2. I have found what's really helpful about the Enneagram is wings. Mm-hmm. And so like a 2, that the whole 3 wing doesn't, I find I don't relate to that at all.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the 3 that rings true for me.
Nothing about the achieving, winning,
performing, none of that. Like that's just, that has never been my go-to place. But the 1, the right and wrong,
reformer,
my way or the highway, justice, anger.
Make it better.
And motivated by those things, that rings true for sure. So grateful for those things that bring insight, and then how to move into health. And,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. So I think a lot of that got formed in that season.
I'm sure.
Learning how to be a caretaker for my own family, to support my mom and my dad while he was getting help,
Yeah.
and some unhealthy things as well.
Yeah. So because I know you mostly as a worship leader.
Mhm.
Okay. I know you as a singer and a worship person. When did you start I know
Yeah.
you back in Tennessee, you're like writing songs and stuff,
Yeah.
but when did you lead worship then? Or
No, I didn't
when
lead
did
worship.
when did this part?
I played piano. I started piano lessons when I was 3, from a lady named Jane Perry, who was deaf. My first teacher for years was,
Okay.
still is. She's still alive. She won Teacher of the Year in the state.
Amazing.
She's actually an amazing pianist. So I took lessons from her until we left Tennessee, and wrote songs. My first song was called Christians on the Road.
Christians on the Road?
Yeah.
Do you remember it?
Don't you know it?
I don't know,
At all.
but do you remember it?
I do remember it.
Okay, can you sing 2 lines?
Okay. Christians on the road, preaching to the people, saying, come with me. I want to show you Jesus.
Oh, how old were you when you wrote that?
Probably like 6 or 7.
Come on with
Yeah.
that. That's so
Yeah.
good.
Christians on the road. So
Amazing, Noelle. That's so funny to me. I love it.
It is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that part was
Anyway.
alive early.
Yeah. So being included in worship, like I remember doing some songs. My dad's a musician, so is my mom. So I remember doing things with them in Tennessee. But when I moved to Illinois, we had a youth band. All through high school, I got to lead worship in this youth band where we all just made up what we were doing. We had,
Yeah. Was this the 90s?
This was the 90s, yes. So, and the church that we were in for high school, for my high school, was very influenced by the Vineyard. We didn't have any vineyards near us. This is like Peoria, Illinois.
Okay.
And at the time, we didn't have any around that area, but very influenced by all the worship music.
So you played Vineyard tunes.
Yes, we did. And our leadership was going to Toronto all the time. So we
Yeah.
were experiencing a lot of that renewal movement as well. But our youth band, we just kind of made things up. I also did specials in church. I don't know if you're...
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, see,
so yeah.
I had a brief stint. I grew up super charismatic, and then my sister and I, we wanted to have friends, so we convinced my mom to take us to this other church.
Yeah.
It's hard being charismatic.
It is.
It is. So we went to this other church. It was like a Church of
Mhm.
Christ, Christian church kind of a deal, and they had a huge youth group.
Yeah.
100 people. You know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so at church there, almost every Sunday, somebody would get up and sing special music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a thing in the South.
Is it mostly the South?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
Yeah. So I got to do that, to
Did
tracks.
you sing? Oh, yeah, I was going to say, did you sing the tapes?
To tracks. Yeah.
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 And the sound
Shine,
guys,
Jesus, shine.
and the sound guys up there like rewinding it, and it's in the wrong key.
Right.
Flip
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you bought it, there were usually like 3 keys.
That's
you could
right.
Sing it in. So yeah, we had a trumpet player in our church that would like do trumpet to a track. Yes, all of those things. So I had that sort of side of things, which was always like deeply terrifying and embarrassing for me to be the only person up there
Yeah.
doing those things, but loved being part of the band. And I do feel like part of my story is that a place was always made for me, even though I didn't try to find that and didn't seek it out. So wherever I've been, a place has been made from someone else, like
Yeah.
someone else has invited me in.
Is that still true?
I think so. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
still experiencing that or living out of that?
Yeah. I think it's changed from a musical invitation to something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that that's true.
I think that's really wonderful that you've noticed that pattern in your life,
Mhm.
because I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know for me, noticing those sorts of things in my life, it really helps with discernment or
Mhm.
like decision making. Like for instance, very similarly,
Mhm.
I have never applied for a job. I've never gone for a promotion.
Mhm.
It's always come after me.
Mhm.
And so at this point, I'm 40 now. I know that like if the Lord is in something,
Mhm.
I'm not to run for it,
Right.
to wait for it.
Mhm.
And if it comes to me, it might be the Lord.
Right.
You know, that's a great insight on your part, just to know space has been made for you.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And typically where I not only have a space been made, but like an invitation and
That's right.
a pushing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did music. I was very involved in like theater and all sorts of performance all through middle school and high school, did well in all of those things. So I sort of had that life, academic life, and then continued in church all the way through. I feel like I'm a person who, although I've wrestled with the questions of faith, I have always had faith as long back as I can remember.
What does it mean for you to wrestle with the questions of faith?
So I think like I went through a stage in coming out of high school where I did a lot of apologetics and studied philosophy at Ohio State. And
Is that your degree?
That was my minor.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you're way cooler now, even more so. That's amazing.
I'm 2 classes short of a double major, but then I got pregnant. I was married, but I got pregnant.
Noel, okay. At some point, you should get the major. That's just too cool.
I've wondered if I could go back and finish that.
Could. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could. That would be rad.
It's been a while.
It's so rad.
Okay,
so you're a wrestler in some ways.
I am. I'm in my head a lot. Think deeply about things. But within that, I feel like there's always been a grace to also believe.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's not a formula that I would say that I have done or a discipline even necessarily that I have cultivated other than just showing up always. That's the only thing I can say that I've done my whole life is to just keep putting myself in the place of faith. But to me, that has felt like a gift from the Lord to have belief. And so even though there's wrestling and I actually enjoy the wrestle of what does this mean? There's things in my life right now around race and areas of justice that are like deep places of wrestling and sorrow, but there's still like a core of belief in who God is and that the church matters and that he's good. All of those things feel real solid to me. Mm-hmm. And the older that I get, I guess I've realized that's a grace to me. That's not something that I've earned or or even produced, I guess.
Yeah. So. No, that's great. I really resonate with that. I have had tremendous seasons of wrestling that I didn't ask for that just came upon me,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Yes.
And when it happened at the beginning, I got really scared because I thought, I literally thought because of some of the way I grew up, I thought that I was becoming an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't realize was, this is just kind of normal Christianity,
mm-hmm,
you know?
Yes.
I ended up meeting someone who was a little further down the road than me.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me. It was in a really funny moment. I was sort of like borderline agony, like, soul
mm-hmm.
agony kind of a thing. And
yeah.
felt pretty tormented. And he said, Adam, you just need to know everything you're experiencing right now is 100% normal. Like Christians for thousands of years have asked these questions and have wrestled. And that was such a huge relief to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jay Pathak in Denver often says like honest Christians are temporary atheists.
That's right.
So yeah, there's just moments of like, I don't know.
I'll just tell you, when someone doesn't have the I don't know occasionally, I really struggle to trust them.
Of course.
It's like, have you considered exactly what it is that life is about?
Yeah. Well, I tell our kids fairly often, like, what we believe is actually pretty crazy.
Oh, it's bonkers. Yes, absolutely. I totally love that. I love that. I totally love that because it's like.
And if you don't think it is, then you haven't actually thought about it.
Yeah, we believe, the foundation, like, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, like if the resurrection isn't real, we have no hope, right? You're like, okay, that's great. Then you start thinking about resurrection. You're like, this is not.
Yeah. This is not a story.
This is not a story.
A metaphor.
This is something else, right?
Legit, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So this was a part of your like college atmosphere.
Yeah. So backing up a little bit. So I went through high school, very performance driven as far as like, that's what I did. I spent enormous amounts of time, theater and music in the arts. I was not athletic. So that's
hey, but you had your thing. You had your thing.
Yeah. So you won't find any great stories about me there. But towards the end of high school, I actually developed an eating disorder and had 2 years of pretty extreme bulimia. And so that was part of my like, I have this life with the Lord. I have this achievement thing, in school and the arts. And then I have this other piece that I'm just desperately trying to control something, to find identity, find affirmation. Something in there is deeply broken, but they all felt very separate to me. Like, oh, well, that's not my faith and that's not my achievement. And of course they weren't separate, but, so towards the end of high school, I had a scholarship to a great school in California, had my whole life mapped out, what I was going to be a psychologist, blah, blah, blah. And I actually had a vision, which this is the only time in my life where I've actually had what I would call a vision.
Like an open vision.
Yeah.
Not just a vision for your life.
Correct. Not just like an impulse or an intersecting thought, but like an actual, I'm awake and I'm having some sort of what feels like a dream, seeing myself. So in the vision, I was seeing the library at the college that I was headed towards in California, and I could see myself slumped over a table in the library and being found dead. So in eating disorders, at a certain point, your internal organs start turning on themselves. And so heart attacks and things like that are actually the way that people who struggle with that die. And so in this vision, that was actually, I was being found dying or dead. And I felt really clearly from the Lord, like, this is actually the path that you're on. And yet, even with that warning, I was powerless to change. I'd been in counseling, done all this stuff, and I just couldn't break it. And so maybe a month later or so, I don't remember exactly, we were at church. Our church was pretty crazy at that time, like out of control. The whole renewal thing, it was just like my brother left the faith then and has never returned. But that, I just went because I needed to go or whatever. But anyway, a pastor from our church came up to me. I did not go up for ministry time. It was, I was not participating really. But a pastor came up to me who did not know anything about my life and put his hand on me and said, "It will never happen again," and walked away. And in that moment, the Lord just healed me.
Oh my goodness. Did you feel anything in that moment?
I didn't fall over. I didn't start. I mean, it wasn't.
Was it just kind of nothing?
It just something changed.
Dang.
So it was.
I so love these stories. I love these stories.
So for me, I actually am a very emotional person. I cry really easy. Actually, I love crying over people. There's something good and healing about that. I don't remember it being at all emotional.
Amazing.
But there was truth in it that changed everything. So in that moment.
And this wasn't a pastor who knew what you were struggling with?
No, nothing.
Come on with that.
So, and he didn't even speak to, it wasn't like prayer ministry like we think about it maybe in the Vineyard where we talk a lot, or it wasn't an interview. It wasn't any of the things that maybe we would say to do. He just said it will never happen again and walked away.
Amazing.
So anyway, that really changed the trajectory of my life and brought me to a surrender with the Lord that I hadn't experienced probably since I was little. So I ended up going to Youth with a Mission instead of going to college. Yeah. So I did that for 2 years, went through a worship school.
Where'd you go?
I spent a year in Arkansas doing the discipleship school and the School of Evangelism. Okay. And left Arkansas and went to...
As one does. Yeah.
Went to Montana for the School of Worship, which was a very international school at that time. People from all over the world came. Yeah. So got to spend a winter in Venezuela doing worship all over Venezuela. And really powerful, really formative, really messy. Lots of young people leading young people, which is beautiful and terrible at the same time.
That's right.
So got to experience all of that.
Yeah. Did anybody tell you, Noel, God told me we're going to get married?
Ooh, no.
Okay, good. Because that's always what happens when young people lead young
No,
people
it was
lead young people.
Unfortunately, the guy leaders that I had that weren't super healthy were more like women had to look a certain way for them to be marriage material.
Oh,
so I had like short hair and was a kind of a punker. So I was not in there.
You were
category.
a punker?
I did. Yeah.
Wow, you're blowing my mind right now.
My kids are still like,
But it was the 90s.
You had how many holes in your face? You know,
it was the 90s.
It was the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny, the culture that I'm in now, everybody listened to 90s hip hop or 90s rap. I know none of it. Like I was all about the angst. So all of my music then was, not hip hop or rap.
Listen, we just gave each other a high five because, I was so formed in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it's come up on this podcast a lot, actually. It's like, I was so baptized in whatever, like, the Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Seattle thing was. It deeply resonated with me.
Yeah. And actually, girl artists, I mean, it was also, there's always a pop era going on, but like Tori Amos or Fiona Apple, like
the Breeders,
there were some.
The Breeders?
Yes. They were just powerful women that were raw and vulnerable. And
Ani DeFranco?
Yes. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's right.
So, yes, all of those.
I'm so glad you know about this. This is great.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Anyway, so I did YWAM, came out of the School of Worship being convinced that I was not a worship leader. I wrote a ton. I wrote music all the time, and the songs that I wrote were not church songs. And so that to me felt real clear that how I was made and how I communicated.
Did someone tell you you're not a worship leader?
No. I think most people actually saw calling. What I felt most passionate and gifted in, I could not see a representation of that in the church.
So why do you think that you conflated songwriting with worship leading?
Because all my songs were, I should pause before I answer that question. My impulse is all my songs were for Jesus. So they felt like worship to me.
Christians on the road.
Well, I got a little better.
No, I'm just saying, but like it's even, to me, what I hear in this is even there's something in you, even at a very early age that was like, you're telling this, you're writing these songs that are sort of like telling some sort of a story,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think at, 18, 19, you're thinking about passion and, that vocation absolutely has to match passion. And instead of like, oh, there's this full orbed thing of who I am. And maybe there's going to be different implementations of this in my life. But what I do the most may not be the thing that I think is where the most passion is right now, or something like that. So I was sorting all of that out, but really felt like, man, I do feel like I'm called to make music. I'm called to write. I have giftings in a certain area, and I actually don't see that wanted in the church. And so I'm going to be part of the church and I'm going to serve in the church, but actually how I'm made and wired, I'm going to have to find another place for.
I still think it's very interesting that you felt like your songs didn't fit, so you felt disqualified to be a worship leader.
Yeah, I mean,
is that just 90s authenticity stuff? Like
maybe,
like I can't be a worship leader unless I'm leading some of my own songs.
Maybe. I that's a good question for me to reflect on.
Yeah.
I mean, like in my school of worship, like Paul Baloche came and had just written, like he literally taught us.
Open the eyes of my heart.
He'd literally just written
it.
Hey guys.
Yeah.
Like, hey, there's a song I'm teaching some people,
That's
sweetest
right.
guy. So yeah, I think I did have a paradigm of worship leaders are writers.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to do this other thing. And so I'm sure some of it was just, I want to do this. I think I'm supposed to. So I'm going to have to do two different things rather than figuring out a way for them to combine.
Okay. But I know your story, and I know you became a worship leader and you've written songs. So what was the breakthrough moment there?
Well, I left YWAM after I finished that school, was at a real crossroads, had a bunch of weird things happen that summer with music that were all exciting, but basically had like 3 or 4 cities that I was being asked to move to by different people. And none of them felt good, even though they were exciting opportunities. I I had a moment at a music festival called Cornerstone Music
Dude.
Festival. Yeah. So went to that forever and ever.
Out in the cornfield.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a huge hardcore tent back in the day.
Yeah, I used to get knocked out in the mosh pits there.
Yeah.
That's actually how I discovered one of my favorite bands, was getting knocked out and being drug out of the tent. And then I heard another band. I'm like, oh, they're beautiful. So Over the Rhine, that's how I discovered Over the Rhine.
Oh, man, come on.
Yeah.
Drunkard's Prayer.
Yes.
Forever and a Day.
So
Yeah.
many. But anyway, at Cornerstone, I was playing at Cornerstone, and literally like someone brought up a message to me on stage from these, producers that were in the audience, like, we want to meet with you afterwards or whatever. So these exciting things were happening. But again, I went to Nashville. I did the studio, whatever, where they bring all the people in a room and you think you're going to die because they're all watching you and critiquing you.
Yeah.
I forget what that's called, but anyway, Crossroads. And then I visited Columbus, just helping my dad do an art show. And we had a family friend that was in the Vineyard, and their daughter went to this young adult service called Joshua House. And so I went with her that night, and there was just something special about that community. And it was maybe 100 kids, like college age kids, who had just discovered life with Jesus, and specifically in the Vineyard were creating their own thing within this big church. And a couple of the guys that were there were like, why don't you move here? So this all happened like in a night.
That sounds like they just wanted a girlfriend.
Maybe.
Noelle, just move here.
It did turn out there were some weird other things going on.
Yeah, of course. Listen,
with any 19 and 20-year-olds,
Yeah,
there
it's
were
like, Noelle, just move here.
just some mixed motives.
That's right. But you did move there.
But I did. So I went home and prayed about it, and it felt like the only right place. So there was an invitation from the Lord. So looking back, like, that was brave and crazy. Like, I knew our family friends. I didn't know anybody else. I didn't have a job. Started working at a music store. My very first week there, got invited to, start on the worship team. And
Again, invitation.
yes. And again, there's a guy named Michael Gallagher who's my age.
Oh, I know Michael.
Yeah, maybe a year older than me. And that's the story of his life. Like, I see you, bring your guitar. You're like, I don't play guitar. Like, I only know 3 chords. Perfect. Come. That's what he's done his whole life. So he just made a space for me immediately. We had no rules. Like, there was no character test. There was no anything, which was good and bad. But anyway, so I got to jump right in, and that was such a sweet season. Like, we were all just growing up together in the Lord, and the Holy Spirit was so powerful.
And that put you in that Columbus swirl.
It did. And like hardcore, like within months, I'm like playing conferences and stuff like that. And again, I have no idea why. Like, there's lots of singers and lots of keyboard players. And
That's right.
all of those things. But that was gift and invitation.
Yeah, it's just the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, my story at Vineyard Columbus then was I started at Ohio State. I made my first record. I worked in a music store, all of those things, and just kind of grew up with mostly, in the worship community, it was all guys. So there's this group of guys that Jim Zartman, Michael Gallagher, a few others that.
Michael Hansen?
Yeah. So Michael Hansen came a few years later.
Yeah.
Down from Canada.
Yeah.
And Michael saw me. So I feel like there have been several distinct seasons where God has asked me to give up what I have without knowing if there will be anything else.
Mm.
And so there was a certain point in Joshua House, which was the young adult thing, where they'd really moved to like electronica. And so it's tons of like really synthy dance worship. And it was not my thing. And I'm a keys player.
Yeah.
So I was just showing up over and over again, trying to kind of lead this stuff and play this stuff. And there was a real moment where I felt like the Lord said, as long as you stay here, no one else has a place. Like, you're the girl worship leader, basically.
Yeah.
The keys play, like I had a place, and as long as I kept it, it excluded someone else from having that. And that had never been the Lord's message to me before. But there was this moment of, I think it's somebody else's turn. And I don't even know who that is. But as long as I keep the spot, they don't get their shot to grow, to have a place. So I stepped down from worship leading in Joshua House without an invitation to do something else. I was leading in small groups and, other things, which is great.
But the bigger platform.
But I did not leave it for the bigger platform.
Yeah.
And so about 3 months went by and Michael Hansen was new.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, I heard you play keys, which I'm not a great keys player. I'm fine. But I'm like, yeah, I try, So he invited me onto his team. He had someone on his team that needed to take a break or something just to play like pads and I don't even know what, but I didn't sing. Like he didn't know that I sang, which is definitely my stronger gift. So I went several months and then at a certain point he's like, hey, could you sing harmony? I'm like, yes, please.
Yes, give me a microphone.
So that was actually how we started. And then very quickly he saw way more in me than I saw in myself and invited me to start leading with him and, passing things on to me. He's a very generous person with his leadership. So he gave away all that he could and affirmed and encouraged and pushed and, all of those things. And then asked me to start leading worship. And I feel like God's been really kind that every time someone has invited me into deeper leadership, he's given me a bit of a heads up, like, I'm going to ask you for more, something different. So I started leading, I was probably 22 or 23, started leading our weekend services at Vineyard Columbus with like my own team, that sort of stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea that God would come to you and say, maybe it's time for you to step back from this. And you didn't have another thing to jump to, you just have to trust God on this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that happens a lot of times to people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and to me, I don't know if this is true, but I feel like when we're young in the Lord, and maybe in most relationships, like you've always got to have a really clear bridge. Like we're moving from this to this, and you get to see the whole bridge, and you know the transition. I think as we grow in trust and relationship with God, the bridge gets less clear, or there actually isn't a bridge.
That's right.
And so that's been certainly my experience in my life is as I get older in the Lord, the risks get bigger and the waiting is longer.
Oh man, and Tom Petty's right. The waiting's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's what I want to do now, Noelle. This is really good, but I want to take maybe a bit of a turn here. And I know that you are no longer in Columbus, that you live in Denver. And I know that you went with your husband and your family to plant a church sort of in the Mile High vineyard ecosystem.
Yep.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah.
Because you're a pastor now.
I am.
Yeah. You have always been a worship person. You have always been a singer. You have always been a writer, but now you're a pastor and you're like preaching and you're leading teams and you're showing up every Sunday morning as like the boss lady, you know? How did that happen?
Yeah. So I think even the formation that happened in Tennessee as I was a kid, like there's something that got birthed in there for the bigger church and for the nations and for diversity that then the Lord's just been really kind to carry through in lots of different ways through the years. For my husband and I, before we even got married, we had a sense like we're not going to have, he's an attorney by training. We just felt like we're probably not going to have super typical lives. He's probably not going to retire out as a partner in a law firm or something like that. Like we could have had just a cushy life in Columbus, Ohio.
That's right.
But we had a sense pretty early that that was not the case. So our whole marriage, we've been married almost 19 years now. it has been this wrestling of, God, we think you're asking us to something different, but what is it and when is it? So we think it's either missions, church planning overseas, or church planning domestically, but when and where. And we've had different opportunities over the years that felt like, this team or this place. And always eventually the answer would be not now, or not yet, or not this, which has been really difficult. And especially for me, Will is an Ohio boy. My husband's name is Will. So there's lots of familiarity and comfort and success in Ohio. For me, I'd felt ready to launch for a long time.
Yeah.
But that waiting was really crucial. Our youngest is adopted, and at a certain point in his life, when I was itching to launch, felt like the Lord said to me, for some people, it's a sacrifice to leave. For you, it's a sacrifice to stay. And so would you stay? Would you lay this down, this idea?
And you felt like that was for your youngest son?
It was for that season
just
of life. Stability. He
needed whatever
and
that was.
And if he needs it, then our family needs it. Like, it's not just about him.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So that was a real clear point for me of like, okay, Lord, I'm not going to keep holding this out in front of you of when, where, how. So I laid that down, and maybe 3 or 4 years later, all these people started coming towards us with prophetic words about church planning. Like, I've got a picture of radar. Is church planning on your radar? And, all this dreams. Will and I both had a series of dreams about church planning specifically. And so it felt like a very clear, I think this is actually, we're allowed to pick this conversation back up again. And in that same period of time, I had felt a real disconnect from worship emotionally. So I was leading at our big site in Columbus. I'd helped start 2 of our campuses. That was real life-giving to me because it was like grungy again.
Mm-hmm.
I set up and tear down and little teams and, all sorts of like the nuts and bolts of worship life and team building and relationship and all that kind of stuff. So I was rotating every week, like big extravaganza, little place, whatever. So I had all these experiences, but something was still like, I think there's something more. And emotionally, I'm becoming disconnected from worship. My life with Jesus is good. That was really disorienting. And it went on long enough that I met with one of our senior pastors, Stephen Van Dopp, and just said, I think I might have to quit. Like, I don't have integrity right now. I don't feel for worship what I think a worship leader should feel. And he was so encouraging and affirming and just blessing. Like, I think this is actually God's activity, not the enemy, and not sin, and not
you're not
something
a bad person.
weird. Yeah, like you're not actually missing something. You're like paying attention to the right thing.
It's the next thing.
Yeah, which was so shocking for me. Like, I just assumed I was screwing something up, that I was missing something. So he really blessed that. Like, no, I think God's actually disconnecting you so that he can attach you in a different way.
Okay, so you guys start having prophetic words and dreams. You're sort of emotionally disconnecting from worship. How long did it take you to like process all of this into moving to Denver? Was that like a
couple years?
A couple years, yeah.
Yeah. So that the disconnect started to happen first, and what became clear is like, I think actually God's asking me to expand leadership. So part of what happens in any big system, maybe at any business, but specifically churches, is when it's a big church, you're very specialized. So like, I was a worship pastor there. So all I did was like a very little box of things. And so you get good at it because you're specialized, but you're actually not, you don't have the permission or authority to lead in other ways or to influence other things, which is just how big systems work. So I was very aware that was no longer okay for me. That no longer felt like a calling. It felt like an inhibition.
And is that why you got on the teams to like do the campus thing?
I'm sure that was part of it.
Yeah, just like, and gathering new skills and finding a place where you could explore.
That's a bigger story of how worship was changing, kind of at the big, at Cooper Road, the big ship. But yeah, I'm sure like I just needed stretched in different ways. But I also realized pastorally, like we have a marriage and family whole department. We have a discipleship whole department. We have all these things. So when I would run into pastoral issues, I did some of that, but we have like whole systems for every single thing that could come up with people who are really good at that. And I don't want to pass it off anymore.
Yeah, you're ready to own it a little bit.
Yeah. So I looked internally first. I mean, I've gone through every Vineyard class that there has been, but knew I needed something different.
Yeah.
And there wasn't an opportunity to be mentored or expand as a pastor internally. So I went to seminary, and
All right.
yeah, which my husband's always been like crazy supportive. And
Yeah, you getting your? Did you get your MDiv?
I didn't. I got my master's in theology.
Oh, come on with that.
Yeah.
That is so good.
Yeah. So that was a beautiful experience of learning outside the Vineyard with a seminary that's very much aligns with kingdom theology.
Yeah.
But also I got to learn from, really different people. And
It's great.
yeah. So seminary started, we started getting all these prophetic words, maybe within like 6 or 8 months of all those prophetic words coming. Will and I, there's lots of stories in there about my husband's path in this, but we had always dreamed of Seattle. That's like the city we love.
Yeah.
And so every time we'd visit there, we'd look at houses and like,
they're only like $9 million.
Well, you can get like a 2-bedroom for like $500,000.
That's right. Chump change.
Right. 800 square foot little thing. But
yeah.
anyway, we're like, let's just actually look for real. Like, let's include our kids in this discernment process. Let's meet with Rose, who's the Vineyard overseer there at the time. Let's like do it legit. So we took a trip. We did all that stuff. We met with a realtor. We looked at homes, and came home excited, but a little hesitant as well, especially my husband. And within 3 weeks, we had 3 family members die. Within the next 2 months, like my husband had a health breakdown, like had to leave his job, had a leave of absence to like regain health. He's like the steadiest, healthiest person. Like our whole world fell apart.
Yeah. Did it feel like spiritual attack?
It did.
Stage of life, like a bunch of stuff kind of hitting all at once?
All of those things.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was another point of like, oh, I cannot make this happen. I really want to leave. I really want to plant a church, and I actually have to honor my family first, and it's not happening.
Yeah.
So it felt like the death of everything that just was about to come to life.
And how were you emotionally during that season?
Oh.
How were people experiencing you?
Well, you'd have to ask them.
Yeah. Did you feel sad? Frustrated?
I think that I almost didn't allow myself to feel sad. I probably reverted heavily to like my junior high self of like, I've got to take care of this family.
Got it.
I've got to.
Responsibility kicked in.
I just got to be responsible. My dreams cannot come first. God, I'm just going to follow you, even though I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
So that it did feel like numbing, actually, instead of sad or angry or.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I had to come to a place again of, all right, if this is like before it was for our son that we needed to stay, if this is now actually for my husband's health, okay. So that was really brutal. So that was September to December. In January, we got a call from Seattle, from a church there, asking us if we'd be interested in moving there to take over a vineyard. So this started this process, which then led us to Denver because a vineyard pastor in Denver coaches the Seattle area. And he's like, I can give you some insight about Seattle. And we shared with him our vision of neighborhood churches and wanting to be part of a bigger team and not wanting to church plant by just dropping into a city and hoping we could have enough charisma to
That's right.
gather a group of people, which we know we don't have. And his name's Corey Garris. He's like, guys, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. Would you consider coming here? So we continued the process with Seattle, and that was very clear that was not headed in the direction that that was not where we were being asked to land.
Yeah.
And we visited Denver. Ironically, Denver has 300 days of sunshine a year. We went for 5 days and it rained and snowed the entire time. Our kids literally never saw the mountains. Like that is impossible for 5 days.
Amazing. Yeah.
So we can always say like we didn't move because we were like wooed by the mountains.
You weren't falling in love with
nothing. We were not falling in love with anything.
Yeah, you were being led and trusting God.
We actually visited like as many of the vineyards as we could on that Sunday. Just went for like 30 minutes of each service. And every place we went to, like the announcements person was like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen the sun in 3 days," because they're so spoiled.
That's right.
So anyway, we had actually a really hard trip there, but with our family. But all of our kids at different places had either moments with the Lord where it was really clear that they were called to move and called to church plant, or enough of a peace to like step into it.
So how long have you been in Denver now?
2.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be 3 years this summer.
How long have you been working on the project of your church plant?
Since the day we landed.
Okay, yeah. Okay, it was one of those, hit the ground, you're running.
Yeah, which we were told not to do. We were told to like take the
but
first year.
you have like 15 years of pent up, ready to like just attack something, right?
Yes. So for better or worse, attack is probably the right word.
Yeah.
So I've learned a few things.
That's right.
So within a few weeks after we moved there, we had like 50 people in our house for like let's hang out and get to know each other. And so we've been meeting as a church for 14 months now, and got a beautiful group of people on the east side of the city that are gathering and learning. We're just learning how to do this together.
Well, I have a couple questions about like that transition, and then we can wrap. But one of the most common pieces of our story is that, at least in the Vineyard, lots of worship leaders become pastors. It's a real normal path.
Yeah.
How do you feel as a pastor now? Like, what's it like to preach a lot?
Well,
is that exciting, or is that
it is.
Yeah.
So I think in training to become a pastor, which not everybody kind of gets that chance to do, I'm really grateful that I did. The process of preparing for a sermon is really exciting to me. I think so much of good worship leading is pastoring. It's having insight, and our best songs are coming from Scripture. They're holding truth from Scripture out in a form that people can take hold of and remember. And a good worship leader is aware of that and is inviting and making that clear for people in a pastoral way. So I think there's lots of bridges for people who then learn how to speak and to preach. So that part I love. I love looking at Scripture and seeing like just what God might be saying to a particular group of people in a particular time. I think finding my voice has been really hard. Yeah. So
what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Because I love talking to preachers about this very thing. What does it mean to find your voice?
So I think in Denver specifically, I have been raised both in childhood and then under Rich Nathan in Columbus with a pretty linear way of teaching. So it's very clear. It's going in a certain direction. It's almost task-oriented in a way, like here's what the Scripture is asking of us. Here's how we respond, and done really well.
Yeah, clearly. Like Rich is a legend.
Yes, and actually the pastor that I grew up under was a great teacher as well. So I've been deeply formed in that, and even in seminary, like you start with the text. And of course it should be relevant. You should always be asking like, well, who cares, whatever. But like, there's a linear way of thinking about that. My experience in Denver and under Jay's leadership, Jay Pathak, is it's very, very different. It doesn't feel linear to me at all. Jay obviously has a plan, but it's much more wrapped around storytelling. It's just a very, very different model of communication. I never wanted to be Rich. And I watched so many people try to sound like Rich, and that never felt like a temptation to me. So in Columbus, I felt like I actually had a voice and it felt authentic to me. Moving to Denver and trying to reach our crew where they're at and how they're used to being communicated with, but authentically for myself has been much more of a challenge.
You feel like you're getting there now?
I do. Yeah.
Repetition helps, doesn't it?
Repetition helps and vulnerability helps.
Yeah.
So I think that's been the clearest shift for me.
How have you been vulnerable?
By moving to Denver. And
No, I'm saying like vulnerability.
No.
You say the process is what is
the process.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
No, I think for me, the end of this last year, I usually have a word that the Lord kind of speaks to me for the year. And at the end of the year, I was kind of reflecting like, I'm not sure I lived up to my word this year. Because it was choose. And I'd kind of assumed like, oh, it's going to be around health issues and, these different categories that I need to apply to my life. And at the end of the year, I'm like, I just didn't do that well, and felt like really quickly the Lord's like, oh, you chose over and over again.
Yeah.
You chose vulnerability. You chose to show up not knowing what you're doing over and over and over again. Like in front of critique, in front of opposition, in front of encouragement, in front of all sorts of things.
And the unknown.
All of my stuff comes out, all of my anxiety, all of my everything like gets amplified in other people. So that kind of vulnerability, communicating to a group of leaders that didn't choose me, like Jay and Corey invited me. They didn't get to choose.
Yeah.
And so that reality of like, I'm actually a different package than you may have wanted. But for whatever reason, not because of competency or this amazing track record of planting churches, just out of God's extravagance,
here I am.
He asked me to do it.
Yeah.
For this season.
That's right.
And so that is a very vulnerable place to like own the incompetency over and over and over again.
And so what would you say your preaching style is now? Like you're 2.5 years in, you've had some repetition, you've lived this vulnerable place, you've had a certain kind of like linear thing in your past with Rich and the previous pastor. Like, who is Noel as a preacher?
I think that's still in pretty early formation. So I don't have a concrete answer for that.
It took me 4 years to figure out kind of like where I was. It was a journey.
I would hope that in anything that I get to deliver, that like the truth of the Lord's word comes through, even if it's through stories or even if it's not 3 bullet points that people are, a lot of alliteration. I love alliteration, but even if there's nothing like of those hooks that people might remember, that something of the Lord's truth is illuminated in a way that sticks. So that is my hope. That's what I'm aiming for. And I am learning to like tell a lot of stories and trust that stories have power without me explaining them to death.
They clearly do. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was telling Ted Kim this the other day. Ted's another worship leader in our movement, for those of you who are listening to the podcast. I was telling Ted the other day because he was asking me about preaching. And I'm like, Ted, I have a dream in preaching. And one of the things I want to eventually do is I want to get up in front of a church and I want to tell a parable, or I want to tell a story, and I want to walk off the stage with no explanation. I just want to do the Jesus thing one time, you know? Like, there was a man who was building a house, and he had a couple boys. I just want to do this,
Yeah.
Yeah. They're so profound, actually.
Yeah. They matter.
Yeah.
So that is quite the journey and process. It's been a gift. I think, especially towards the end of this last year, we hit some really hard relational things that were happening within our church, and just marked again, like, Lord, did you really ask me to do this? Like, surely there's someone better for this. And no doubt there is. But just the extravagance of God over and over again in my own life. And that then I get to call out in others, like, He is not calling me because I'm the best church planter. I don't know why He is.
But He is.
He gets to decide that.
Amen.
And so there is a confidence, I feel like, that changes my preaching if I'm leading from confidence rather than fear.
Yeah. Do you miss worship leading?
I don't miss it because I do it a lot.
Still lead worship a lot?
I do.
Yeah, it's that church planting thing, isn't it?
Well, that's been an interesting wrestle for sure, because really until a couple months ago, that emotional disconnect that happened probably like 5 years ago really had never shifted. back on if it's an on and off button. So as soon as I moved to Denver, I led worship a ton within our neighborhood model just because they needed worship leaders. So I'd just travel wherever and lead for our various churches and was happy to do that. But it was like, this is something I can do.
Yeah, it's not why I came.
It's not why I came. And it's actually like, I don't have fire in my bones for this.
Yeah.
And that again feels like I'm just trying to honor God with this, but I sure hope it doesn't stay like this forever.
Yeah.
I would love to feel different.
Yeah. And now you are?
It's begun.
Amen.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I've had a couple experiences over the last maybe 6 months where I'm like, oh, I feel kind of integrated again. I'm starting to write again.
That's great.
Yeah, those things feel like they're kind of coming to life. And I think I did buy into this reality of either or, where to step into pastoring and leading a church and church planning meant that I had to lay down this other thing up. Mostly, I think, because it has been so much of my identity, being in a big church, like people didn't even know my name. It was like, oh, you're the worship leader, kindly, but there's just an identity that
you're the piano girl.
Right.
Yeah.
My best friend's name is Sarah, and she leads from guitar and was at Vineyard Columbus the whole time that I was. And we don't actually look that much alike close up, but we're both blonde and not very tall. And people confused us all the time. So I was leading at our East Campus with Dr. Charles Montgomery, and we had a guy there who showed up for worship and then drove all the way to our big campus to be an usher for the second service. And he messaged me and he's like, you are amazing. You were leading worship when I left. And when I showed up at Cooper Road, there you were on stage leading from guitar.
Not exactly.
So I did not have a helicopter. We are different people.
That's hilarious.
But there was such an identity piece there that I think I did buy in at some level of like, I have to move to Denver clean. I'm not a worship leader. I'm something different.
Yeah. But maybe some of that's coming back to life.
It is. I don't think the Lord actually asked for that. So.
Yeah. I'm even thinking of another friend right now, like Crispin Schroeder down in the New Orleans area. Crispin has modeled this, I think, really well. He's clearly the pastor, but Crispin has not let go of that musician and creative side of who he is.
Yeah.
That's great.
I just saw Michael Hansen, who's also transitioned to a senior pastor, and he encouraged me, like, don't stop leading. It's actually really important. It's part of how you lead, actually. Yeah. It's part of how you form culture and all that. So I'm learning. I'm a baby. We're a baby church.
That's great.
Yeah.
Noelle, this has been really, really wonderful. And there's a lot of gold in here. But I want to end the podcast with the question we ask everybody. All right. Totally kind of off the subject. Can you just tell us a time you experienced great joy?
Great joy. Actually, the most recent moment that I can remember is maybe a few weeks ago. And it was a Sunday night, which is a quiet night in our home. We don't typically go anywhere or schedule anything. And we have 3 teenagers, which I love that stage, but it has its challenges. And the 5 of us were at dinner just laughing, just actually enjoying each other. Our kids telling jokes with each other that weren't at each other's expenses.
That's right.
There was just a camaraderie and a feeling of being settled that felt like a real moment in our...
Was this in your home?
Is in our home, in Denver.
Yeah.
Like, we're 2.5 years in. We're actually like having fun now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So there's a lot.
That's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. What a great way to end this podcast.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. What a privilege.
This is great. All right, everybody. Have a good week wherever you are. And listen, if you're in the Denver area, go to Noelle's Church. Check it out.
Hey everybody, this is Casey Corum, the producer of the Ferment Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I've got a couple ways you could really help us. First of all, review the podcast on iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media, on Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and on Twitter at FermentCast. All right, people, see you next time.